the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, had informants there. The FBI had informants. The Secret Service was there. I found out later the CIA was there. As far as I can tell, just about every federal agency was there except the IRS. And they had informants with Tim McVeigh, planted with him, and the people who helped him in the bombing. They knew well in advance of April 19th, 1995, that the bombing was going to take place, and they never stopped it. And what I've never worked out in my mind is whether it got away from the government, that they intended to stop the bombing, or whether they wanted it to happen. That I don't know. But they clearly knew it was going to take place. They were told months before and did nothing to prevent it.
Well, you mentioned the phone call that... Sorry, I was going to mention, you mentioned earlier the phone call that Timothy McVeigh made to Elohim City 2 days before, and from my understanding, that was an attempt to get help with the bombing from somebody at the compound. Where does that information come from?
It comes from an FBI document, a teletype from FBI Director Louis Freeh to the field office in Oklahoma City, I think it was Kansas City, and in Omaha, that McVeigh had called Elohim City 2 days before the bombing, asking for more help.
But we don't know specifically who he was calling at that time.
I don't know who he was calling, but whoever he was calling certainly was working for the government, or else someone standing there was working for the government, because they reported the phone call.
Well, tell us about Andreas Strassmeyer and his role.
Strassmeyer was a German national. He was illegally in the United States. He was a former German intelligence officer. He was the explosives and weapons training person at Elohim City. He leaves Elohim City immediately after the bombing, and he is taken out of the country by the CIA. They take him out through Mexico and then back to Germany. And interestingly, in all my years of fighting these Freedom of Information Act requests, battles with the federal government, in only one instance has the government asserted national security as an exemption. Their national security is a trump card when you in a FOIA request. Once that's asserted, the judge is shut down and they can't turn over the documents. It turned out that the CIA had the spy satellite systems over Elohim City. Why in the world they would do that, I don't know. And I asked for the records on that, and it came back, and the response was, to release this information, these documents would pose a grave threat to the national security of the United States of America. And that's the only instance. The FBI has done everything but assert national security when they fight me for these documents. The same is true of the other agencies, but the CIA played the national security card right up front. And the CIA is not supposed to be involved in domestic intelligence. It is a foreign intelligence service, and it's illegal for the CIA to have operations within the United States.
That's absolutely true, but I suppose if they just continue to assert national security, then no one can ever really get to the bottom of their operations within the country. But it's certainly the connection to Strassmeyer is particularly interesting, and I believe the official version of events states that Strassmeyer was not acquainted with McVeigh, or only briefly acquainted with him.
Only briefly acquainted with him, and yet Nichols said that Strassmeyer had told McVeigh that Elohim City would be a safe house for them after the bombing.
Well, tell us about the bank robbing syndicate that McVeigh was involved with, that was somehow perhaps being used to come up with funding for this bombing. Tell us about that and how this ties into the case.
Well, Richard Guthrie was one of the leaders of a group called the Midwest Bank Robbers. And they would rob banks in the Midwest and use the money, funneling it into Elohim City and other places. They literally were insurrectionists, and they wanted to cause an uprising in this country against the federal government. Their plan was to attack the federal government, to blow up federal buildings, to kill federal officials, to incite race riots. They were racist, neo-Nazis. And McVeigh robbed banks with them. In fact, he was the getaway driver, drove the getaway cars for them on a number of bank robberies. And as I said, Guthrie was apprehended, and just before he was to give a tell-all interview with the Los Angeles Times that would blow the lid off the Oklahoma bombing story, he supposedly hangs himself while in FBI custody. And this man was a former Navy SEAL. They're not typically, I don't think those are the kind of people who go out and kill themselves.
One would assume not, no. And, all right, well, there are so many different aspects to this case that we've already starting to gloss over some of them. So let's go back and look at some of the different ways in which the government had foreknowledge of what was coming at the OKC bombing. And you mentioned that there was an informant who knew, who actually went to case out the Alfred P. Murrah building before the bombing took place. Tell us a little bit more about that story.
That informant was Carol Howe. She had gone with Strassmeyer and others from Elohim City to case a number of federal buildings in Oklahoma City. And this was in October of 1994 as a potential bombing target. This testimony came about in a trial or hearing in federal court in Oklahoma. Is taking place while the McVeigh trial, federal trial for murder, is taking place in Denver, Colorado. The United States Attorney in the proceeding in Oklahoma jumps up and says, "My God, Your Honor, if this gets out, it's going to cause all kinds of problems." And the judge and the U.S. Attorney says, if it gets out that the federal government knew that these folks in Elohim City were planning to blow up a federal building in Oklahoma City, while that McVeigh trial is going on, it is going to cause us all kinds of problems. So the judge ordered the transcript sealed. And I was leaked a copy of that, and I put it out to the world. And for my own preservation and to get the word out and the knowledge out about what had happened, I made an effort that the moment I receive a document or any information, I put it out to the media, to everybody in the world who wants it. And
absolutely, and let's just stop there for a moment, because I think some people might not appreciate just how important that is, but obviously, as has been proven time and again in the case of your brother and many other people involved with this case, there have been people who have been murdered or accidentally murdered or what have you because of their relation to this case, and it's absolutely vital that people who have information like this do get it out and out into the public as soon as possible for their own protection, at any rate.
I had a former federal person tell me that anyone can commit a murder,